Hi guys, how are you doing? My name is Abad Rahman. Welcome to my channel Finico once again. Now the last video what we spoke about was about an incredible financial concept, haven't we? About option trading strategies for beginners. Today in this video, we're going to take a jump from finance all the way to economics. Just not the name of the channel being Finico, which is the abbreviation and an acronym to the full form finance economics, but as well as how astoundingly these two subjects are correlated to each other. So today we're going to speak about a great economical indicator which has been attributed and used and acknowledged by many of the economists, all the way from William Phillips to the Indian economist Raghuram Rajan, who also happened to be the chief economist of the IMF during the 2005 period, and at the same time my favorite economist Ray Dalio, who is supposedly the founder, actually he is the founder of the supposedly largest hedge fund in the world, Bridgewater Associates. So, Philip curve. Now what does this Philip curve basically means? Well, it goes on to tell an individual, a group, a people, a society, a community that you can go on to use this very curve in order to gauge what is the economical condition of an economy of a given country during a particular period of time. What this curve basically states that inflation, which is always on the y-axis, which is vertical, and your unemployment, which is always on the x-axis, horizontal, is inversely proportional to each other. In other words, inflation and your unemployment is opposite to each other. If there is high inflation, there will be low unemployment. If there is low unemployment, there will be high inflation. In order to better understand what I'm saying, let's draw a figure, shall we? Okay. So here you have basically, this is your y-axis, this is your x-axis, this is your unemployment, and this is your inflation. And over here, this is your long run Philip curve. Now just because it's a curve, your short run Philip curve will always be a curve. Long run Philip curve will be vertical. Don't ask me why, that's how it is. So this is considered, oh by the way, I completely forgot to tell you guys a very important concept about again the Philip curve is you can gauge the economic condition of a given economy at three given points. So either this, the mid-center, the epicenter, being your full employment, okay, full employment, and if we go all the way towards the unemployment, here would be your recessionary, okay, and here this point would be your inflationary. So again, as you can see, high inflation contributes to low unemployment, and high unemployment contributes to low inflation. So this is inversely proportional to each other. Now the very pertinent and the relevant question, what you should be asking me is this actually, can this be used in order to gauge an economy at this very particular period of time? And for those folks who are being updated on a regular basis, if not day-to-day basis, what is the current economic activity or the condition of the global economy, then they would actually go on to look at this curve and state that yeah, actually something is actually very happening as I speak to you and as I record this video. And let's take a great example of the country which we all look up to based on how strong its economy is, and it's a financial powerhouse, USA. So let's take an example of USA. All right? Okay, so why have I taken the example of USA? Inflation, inflation, inflation. Just not USA, but many of the developed countries and emerging countries are going through inflation. But since we have taken the example of USA, let's stick with USA. Now, before I can go on to tell you about what kind of inflation indicators are, I would first like to define what inflation is. Inflation in layman terms, in a very simple term, means the loss of purchasing power. Imagine that you have gone on to and you always purchase a bag of sugar for $1, okay, that's a bag of sugar price. Tomorrow you have gone on to purchase that same bag of sugar and you see from $1 it has actually gone to $2. That is what inflation really is. It is the loss of purchasing power because the income hasn't increased, because the wage hasn't increased, but the very product has actually, the price has actually gone to increase. This is exactly what we're seeing in Turkey right now, a loss of purchasing power and as well as decline in the lira currency. Yes, the lira currency have been upgraded, but again, that's for a shorter story. Okay, for the next story. Okay, now the USA. Now, what are the economical indicators in which we actually go on to gauge the inflation? There are many economical indicators, but one of my favorite being the CPI. CPI basically means your consumer price index, okay? CPI. Okay, now what CPI basically means, that it is the market value, the final value of all the goods and services being sold over a period of time, which is basically being bought by the very consumers, you and me and the likes. So your CPI, according to the latest Wells Fargo, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan weekly report, goes on to suggest that your CPI in USA at this very point of time for the fourth quarter 2021 is at 6.7%. 4Q 2021 is 6.7%. And your core CPI, okay, your core CPI is at 5.1%. Okay. Now, just because I have gone on to write this percentage, this means nothing if I do not compare it with its historical valuation. Its historical valuation over the first quarter 2021, which was just 3 quarters prior, might shock you. For fourth quarter, which is 6.7% for your CPI, that was actually 1.9%. And your core CPI, which is right now at 5.1%, was actually at 1.4%. And this is exactly what we see the danger level really is. You know, I mean, it has gone from 1.4%, and before that, I would also like to state that according to the Federal Reserve Bank, their target rate of inflation is only at 2%. So from 2%, you see, oh my goodness gracious, 6.7% for the CPI, and the core CPI has actually all the way gone into 5.1%. This is a very, very dangerous territory. But why is it that many of the American citizens, or the residents, or even for that sake, Bloomberg analysts and the panelists and the CNBC, they are not tight-lipped, but they're upper-lipped? What's the reason behind it? It's because the wage and the income is increasing as well. Now, this is another and again, we can speak about, oh, it is because of the quantitative easing, and it is because of of the fiscal and the monetary stimulus and the compensations, the unemployment compensations. Yes, for whatever reason, but your inflation is actually increasing, and at the same time, your unemployment is decreasing as well. Now, according to the JP Morgan third quarter, which was of October 2021, what it went on to suggest that the unemployment level in USA was actually at its lowest, and that very low version was actually compared to the period in 1969. And your unemployment status right now in USA, according to the latest Wells Fargo report, is at 205,000. That is what the unemployment status is. It's 205,000, you know. And if you go on to, divide it by the entire population of USA, which is around 331 million, okay, you would get a figure of around 0.068%, which is a wrong way to calculate what many of you people would know. The reason why is rational economists will not take the entire population of USA. No, you don't have to. You actually have to subtract it by the old population who have retired because they're not working. How can you actually contribute it? You also have to subtract the youngsters, the adolescents, the teenagers, the kids from those very group, because they're not working, they're not eligible to work, and they cannot work in order to make sure that the shelter is above them. At the same time, you also cannot include those very folks who are not actively seeking for work because probably they have been born in a silver spoon. I mean, not that, but okay, you know what I mean. So with that, all the sort of indications, now you see through that right now the unemployment status in USA, again, according to the greatest asset management weekly reports, is at 4.1%. And what Philip Curve goes on to suggest that anywhere from 4%, okay, to 6% is regarded as full employment, because there is no economy in this world which can actually be at 0% employment other than it being in a parallel universe. Okay, there just simply cannot be. Your full employment status is anywhere from 4% to 6%, and then it varies from the central banks and to the very economists at those very regions at what particular percentage do they consider to be the full employment. Okay. Now, this very Philip curve, by the way, has its own limitations as well and has been proven wrong. I, right now, can actually go on to prove this Philip curve. Not that I have actually created this, no, but I've read through it and it was very enlightening to what I actually went on to see through the limitations of the Philip curve, something known as an aggregate demand and an aggregate supply. And I would like to, okay, so your aggregate demand and aggregate supply, I will simply draw it over here. So this is your long run aggregate supply. Okay, always a long run is in the vertical axis. Again, don't ask me why, that's how it is. And your aggregate supply would again be a curve. Okay, your aggregate demand would be a curve as well, and make sure that this hits. Why, you ask me? Because this is your full employment status, which is at 4.1% in USA. Let's take it as an example, because we're taking the example of USA. Okay, now this is your aggregate supply and this is your aggregate demand. Voila. Okay, now your aggregate supply has actually gone, let's just say if your aggregate supply shifts towards your left. Okay, so your aggregate supply has shifted towards the left. Now, oh, by the way, I completely forgot to mention this. This is your GDP, okay, in your x-axis, and this is your price in your y-axis. Price is also synonym to inflation. Okay, now your aggregate supply, let's name this as AS1 in order not to be confused. This is AS original, this is aggregate demand original. Now your aggregate supply has shifted towards the left. So now you would see, there is the GDP has actually decreased, but your price level has increased. Now if you plot it, now you might say, oh well, inflation has actually increased, okay, but your unemployment has increased at the same time, which is wrong according to the Philip curve, because they're inversely proportional to each other. See, your GDP was over here, but now your GDP is over here. And when your GDP has decreased, that means there are not many people working for corporations, or corporations have been firing the workers because of the cost of living being high. The raw materials cost and the final value of goods and services, there's just not much of demand. So, which is the reason why you see that the GDP has actually decreased, and when the GDP decreases, your unemployment increases, but your price inflation has increased at the same time. Then how we going to gauge this is we will put an indicator over here, okay? This being over here, now you would see through, voila, unemployment has increased. At the same time, your price has increased as well, because before the price was over here. Now you see, this is actually concerning. Again, now if your aggregate supply shifts towards the right, so this is your new aggregate supply, okay? Over here you would see that the GDP has increased, but your price has decreased. So since your price has decreased, that's a good thing, okay, because inflation has decreased as well. But since your GDP has increased, your unemployment has decreased, which is a great thing. But then again, it's actually inversely proportional, it's actually directly proportional to each other, because your unemployment is decreasing and your price is decreasing. And again, according to the Philip curve, they're inversely proportional to each other. So your new curve would be over here. Okay, this, your price is over here, your unemployment, okay, we will basically point it over here. Now you would see that the unemployment has decreased, and your price has decreased as well. This is your aggregate supply, your changes in aggregate supply. But how would this graph, the Philip curve graph, go on to, how would you dot it if it would be for the sake of the aggregate demand? Aggregate demand, as we mentioned, is over here, okay? Now, let's say this very aggregate demand, if it shifts towards the left, which would be Okay. Okay. So your aggregate demand when it has use this as your new aggregate demand. Aggregate, I don't want to get confused. Aggregate demand 1. So you would see over here that your GDP has decreased as well as your price level has decreased as well. So your price level has actually decreased and your GDP level has your GDP level has actually decreased. So your unemployment status has increased, okay, and your price has decreased, which is again a great gauge because it's inversely proportional to each other. So aggregate demand actually qualifies the Philip curve. So you've got your unemployment status over here is increased and your price level has decreased for your aggregate demand. Now say for these very aggregate demand, if it shifts towards the right, so this would be your new aggregate demand 2. And your aggregate demand 2, your intersection being over here, let's right now put this like this. Now in order not to confuse, it's already confusing and it did confuse me. So this is your aggregate demand 2. Your GDP, as you would see, your GDP has actually, this is your aggregate demand 0. Your GDP has decreased from the prior and your price level has actually increased. So you would see that over here, since your GDP has actually gone on to decrease, your aggregate demand, where we will plot it, yes, your aggregate demand would be over here. Okay, your unemployment has decreased, but your price level has increased as well. So basically what all of this concept, what this basically states, that with your aggregate supply, there would be a change in the entire curve. You have to draw the new curve. And with your aggregate supply, with your changes in aggregate supply, there would actually be a direct proportional relationship between the full unemployment, between the unemployment and between the inflation. High unemployment, high inflation. Low unemployment or low inflation. But for your aggregate demand, it would go on to qualify the same situation of what you would see as we see through that. Hey, listen, I mean, if the aggregate demand actually shifts towards the left, you would see that there is a low level of GDP. Low level of GDP basically means there is low unemployment, but at the same time there is actually a higher price increase, which there is a high price increase. But for aggregate demand, if it shifts towards the right, you would see through that, oh, okay, well, your aggregate demand has actually increased, your GDP has increased, so your unemployment has reduced, but your price level has increased, which again qualifies the Philip curve. Now, this being an example, but let's actually take a real case scenario. Do you happen to remember what happened during the 1970s? 1970s was a period for just not the finance and the economists, but probably for the entire world, especially those individuals who really like to read and know about geopolitics and about history, is they would know through that, 1973 was a very specific period which will always be documented in the history because of the war status. And there was an embargo, okay, which was set up by the OPEC countries, Organization of Petroleum Economic Cooperation, OPEC. Not all the members, but most of the members, which was led by Saudi Arabia, in which they actually went on to put the embargo into action for the very hydrocarbons, mainly the oil, the petrol. So you saw through that the energy price in USA skyrocketed, as well as other countries, but mainly USA, because USA used to purchase a lot of oils from Saudi Arabia. So we were actually living, and we are still living in a decade in which we cannot survive without hydrocarbons. Yes, go green energy, but we have to be realistic that the renewable energy at this point of time, it globally, again, according to the latest Bloomberg report, is around 5% is what the global population uses renewable energy on a day-to-day basis. Hydrocarbon is used 85%. So yes, green energy and green revolution is there, but we have a long way to go. We still are very, very much reliant to the hydrocarbons, okay? Again, remember the percentage. 85% is for the hydrocarbons, 5% is for the renewables at this very point of time as I speak to you. All right, so because the energy prices skyrocketed, that we're going to tell you high inflation. Everything basically got inflated. Your CPI, inflation at that point of time was around that 9.1%, which is very, very extremely high for a developed country, huh? Because we're not speaking about Venezuela or Yugoslavia or Zimbabwe. We're speaking about USA, supposedly the greatest country in the world. That was at 9.1%. And you had unemployment, which was increasing as well, because the very high cost of living was hampering the corporate profits, and with the high corporate profits, people were just getting fired or not getting employed on the basis of how they were actually getting employed during the 1960s. So at that very point of time, this term went on to arise, which was known as, and still known as, stagflation. Okay? Stagflation. And what stagflation suggests, just by the word stagnating. Now, what does stagnating means? That there is no changes. It remains the same, or probably it even goes lower. So the economical activity at that particular period of time in the country was stagnated. And you had high inflation and you had high unemployment. So that is what stagflation sincerely and basically means, which again proves the Philip curve wrong. Philip curve was an hypothesis. It is still an hypothesis. It is not a scientific law, for the very reason it being proven wrong. But we cannot completely contradict the Philip curve of the great importance it has, just like I gave you an example of how Philip curve is being used in United States of America. And what happens, again, this is a bonus point, but how do you counter inflation? One of the ways in countering inflation is by increasing the interest rate. We just went on to see through that 2 weeks back or 10 days back ago, Bank of England went on to increase the policy rate, aka interest rate, by 0.25%. U.S.A, the Federal Reserve Bank, has actually gone on to say that it would trim its quantitative easing, okay, from $15 billion all the way to $30 billion, the $20 billion being your treasury stocks, and the $10 billion being your MBS, mortgage-backed securities. And this is all, and they will also go on to increase the policy rates 3 times in a year. What they are actually targeting to making sure that the inflation will all the way drop down to around 2.23 to 2.25% by the end of 2022. This is not my forecast. This is the forecast, again, coming from a very reliable source, the likes of Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, Wells Fargo, HSBC, which for all the enthusiasts who are in love with finance and economics should be reading it on a day-to-day or at least on a weekly basis. Okay, so fine, we have come to the end of this video. This video is shorter than my previous video, but see, I mean, hey, listen, there is a lot to talk about, again, with finance and economics, which is a great subject. I like it, on the contrary to accounts, no offense accountants, but it is because it has diagrams which you can draw, okay, and which is really, I mean, I love things which has basically diagrams around and you could draw it. It just, yeah, it pumps me. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you guys for watching this video. Please hit the like button, subscribe, comment if you have to, ask me any questions. If I do have the acumen and if I'm as smart as you, I will definitely answer your questions. All right, see you in the next video. Cheers, take care, stay safe, and be vaccinated, okay? I know I was coughing, but hey, I've been vaccinated 4 times. I mean, basically 2 Sinopharm and 2 Pfizer. So anyways, thank you guys. Good luck, all the best. See you in the next video. Cheers.